Hello and welcome to Dojo Live this Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. My name is Kim Lantis and I'll be hosting today along with co-host America Guerrero.
Hello, Stephanie. Hi, Kim. It's my pleasure to be here again.
Yes, of course. And that's right. Our guest today is Stephanie Daniel. She is the co-founder and CEO of Legends. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes, I think it's going to be a really great, insightful, educational conversation. We're here to talk about how to power the new era of personalization. We're going to do that through TravelDNA, and I know you're going to dive into that for us as we answer the question of how the paradigm is shifting between data, privacy, regulation, what that means for marketing, and personalization. But before we dive into that topic, we'd love to kind of get to know you a bit better. Stephanie, what's your story, your background, and what led up to co-founding Legends?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a journey. So I grew up in a tiny village 2 hours south of London in the UK, like pub, antique shop, church type tiny. And I think when I look back now, that's why I became obsessed with travel and what it does for broadening your horizons and kind of that authentic connection with yourself and other people. I was also pretty academic, so I kind of combined that love of the world with studying economics at Cambridge. And I think that's what gave me this foundational belief that I have in the power of data to help the world allocate resources, help us make the right decisions when it's done right. Honestly, I thought I wanted to work for the World Bank or an NGO and travel. The investment banks come to hire. And so I did an internship with Deutsche Bank. And then actually I had a 15-year career with them.
Wow.
6 years in London, and I moved with them in 2011 to New York. So a lot of different roles. I was one of the youngest MDs, one of their only females on one of the excos. I most recently ran a structured finance strategic coverage team, which was 400 million in revenue.
Wow.
So I was very entrenched. I loved a lot about it, a lot of learnings from a complex stakeholder management, complex product innovation, management, strategy, obviously, but the entrepreneur was always going to jump. And it was always going to be to build something with a data and travel angle if I could help it. And I met my co-founder, Shayna Shawaski, 10 years ago as a friend at a birthday party in New York.
How random.
I mean, there's a longer story to that. It was very random because the person whose birthday it was couldn't even show up. But anyway, you know those moments at an event when you huddle in the corner and you really connect with someone. And that's what happened. We bonded over this love of travel that we had, but like pain point as to why was it so hard to find the things that fitted our values, our preferences. And we landed in that very first conversation that it was a data problem. Because why was I digging out my spreadsheet of recommendations? Why was I trying to find this photo of the place I wanted to show her? And we started from this consumer pain point, but then in our journey, we realized it's actually a real industry pain point. And so the solution that we have, that's why we have segued into a B2B technology solution, which I know we'll get into. But we also realized over our 10 years of friendship that we had really complementary experiences and skill sets to kind of bring it to life. So she, after a year in consulting, she spent 10 years in the tech world, progressively earlier startups. And we talked about why are we putting energy into other people's visions, and let's pull the trigger and build Legends to build something that we're both passionate about.
I love it. And I love it that the time is right. You know, one starts out because you do have to eat, right? And then there comes a point where it's like, I am ready. I could feed myself. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. What a wonderful story. You know, you touched a bit on what Legends, the problem that you're solving, but let's dive into that a bit. How does it work?
Yeah. Well, so I guess we had this insight that it was a data problem. And then we realized, well, we carry our phones every second of every day. And our phones have essentially become the operating system of our lives, right? We do everything on it. Every tool is on there. And it's capturing all the data of our experiences, which is essentially our preferences, not least the 5 billion photos that we take every day. And every photo has latitude, longitude, date, time, all this metadata associated with it. And we had the feeling that this data was not being harnessed for anything that was useful for us as consumers. And then over time, we realized it wasn't being harnessed for brands either. So we had that insight. And then at the same time, we realized, well, if every consumer wants more personalization, right? We all want the right thing, right time, particularly, our generation, it drives where we spend our time and money. Why aren't brands delivering it? And we realize that brands want to be delivering it. They are spending a fortune in marketing trying to deliver it, but they can't because they don't have a true picture of who we are. And they don't have a picture of who we are as consumers because we're using all these different tools, and the data gets locked in all these different tools that they can't access it. And then privacy regulations and cookies going away next year only makes the whole thing, harder. And so instead of a world where a brand has first-party data, so the couple times I stayed at Marriott in the last 10 years, right? Not a full picture of who I am. No. Or they pay a fortune for third-party data like Google Trends data, Amex transactional data, various others. Again, not a full picture of who I am, typically not actionable insights. So the future, we believe, has to be what's called zero-party data. And I don't know if this is a term you've heard. Like, I predict that by the end of this year, more people are going to be using the term. The official definition is data that a consumer intentionally and proactively shares about ourselves and about our preferences. And we do that for a value exchange, which can include personalization or rewards. And actually, studies show that 83% of people want to do so, but we don't have easy, trusted tools. And so we combine that insight that the future needs to be zero party with the insight about phones being our operating system. And Legends is the zero party data platform that with a single opt-in consent, we very transparently scan, starting with the data behind your photos. We have a whole roadmap for additional data sources, which we can get into. But starting there, we instantly can scan, process, and transform that into this profile of who you really are. So in the travel context, we call it TravelDNA. And imagine now when you click that button, we now know every country and city that Kimberly's ever been to. But we know that you love to surf in the morning in a Costa Rica type climate with your family, and you love boutique hotels and sushi. And so now we can present that data in an engaging way for you as a consumer. And there's this like self-actualization kind of social currency associated with that. And then at the same time, we can deliver that to the brand. So the brand now does know who you are, and they can hyper-personalize to you across channels. So from a marketing perspective, from a guest experience perspective. So that's kind of the problem that we're solving, and our solution. Yeah.
There's so much tech involved there. It kind of blows my mind in terms of,
But ultimately, it all ties into our mission, right? And our mission, which is what we started is this belief that we have that travel, when it's done right, leads to authentic connection with yourself, each other, and the world. And only when you travel in line with your actual preferences and who you truly are can that happen. So that's why we.
How do you associate this mission with the name of your company, Legends? I'm curious.
Yeah. So there's a funny story. So I was sitting in my loft in Soho, and I had booked a kind of last minute soul trip, I used to call it, to Mexico, actually, to Oaxaca. And I was packing. I was last minute, as usual. And Shayna and I had gone for dinner, and we had decided that that was the night. We were deciding the name, we were buying the domain, and we were pulling the trigger on doing the business. In order to inspire where I was going for this trip, I had bought like an old school paper map from the bookstore, and I had it laid out on this desk. So while I'm packing, she suddenly stands up. She goes, "I've got it." I was like, "What?" She goes, "It's Legends." Because at the bottom of a map, there's the legend, or that tells you basically how to interpret the symbols and how to explore the world. And so we started that, and we said, well, also a legend is a shared story that's handed down through generations of shared values and learnings. And then thirdly, everyone wants to be a legend and kind of create a legacy of their experiences and leave that kind of behind them. So that's behind the name.
Yeah, I love it. And just, the trip was legendary. Like, exactly. It's very perfect. I want to dive into, I believe it's a term that you may have coined or close to it, and that's with TravelDNA. But before we dive into the TravelDNA component with how Legends processes that and provides it to, the marketers for increased personalization, I'd like to talk about that paradigm shift. You mentioned cookies disappearing, and what is this shift in data privacy regulation that's happening, and why should companies be paying attention? I mean, companies in general, but specifically in the travel and hospitality sector.
Yeah. So I think start from a consumer standpoint. I think that we're almost at like this social awakening of the fact that our data has been being shared and like monetized without us being in control of it or really receiving the benefit of it. So we have become the product, right? And so I think we're at kind of the beginning of that shift, and we're seeing people come off certain social platforms because they don't want to do that. But that being said, studies show that people are willing to share the data, like I mentioned, when they are in control of what they share, how they share it, with whom, and that they're getting the benefit of it. And so from a social like paradigm shift as it relates to privacy, that's I think where we're at. Now, I do think there's this concept of a privacy personalization paradox, which is a term that's used where people know they want this personalization, but they want this privacy. And we believe that people want to share it in a trusted way. And so that's why Legends is the tool that can deliver that. From a brand perspective, there's been these shifts that have happened over time of brands realizing, there's email marketing, SMS marketing, and then they realized that they needed to personalize because that's what was giving the uplift in revenue and conversion and loyalty. And now people realize the power of AI to do the personalization, but AI is only so powerful as the data that can drive it. And so in this world where data is being locked in all these silos as I mentioned, brands are too limited in the sources that they have to know their customer. And so, and with regulation making it harder for brands to get that data, that's kind of the regulatory kind of paradigm shift that I'm talking about, that I think the world has to go to intentional data sharing from consumers.
Do you think,
like you'll see that just to mention that the news of Google, like Google's running tests right now with 1% of the population on Chrome, and they've said it's going to be, gone by the end of the year. So it's been a long time coming, but that means that brands won't have the information that they previously had on their customers. And so there is this urgent need for a new solution. And I think people are only kind of just waking up to it.
and do you think that this shift with data is just happening in the travel industry, or are you seeing this trending everywhere? Because I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, in the healthcare industry, it might be, there is like information that you don't want to share out there. But with travel, I think that it's different. What do you think?
Yeah. So big picture, this, I believe affects every single industry. Like it's the shift in how brands and consumers need to interact. And there's this big gap for tools to enable that new method of interaction, which is effectively direct data sharing. So I think of sectors like e-commerce, fashion, retail, bank loyalty programs. In every single sector, I think there has to be a shift. The reason travel and hospitality is such an urgent problem is it's a very antiquated kind of technology stack that has evolved over time, and it's led to a real problem of data fragmentation in the industry. And so the pain points are incredibly deep, and the upside, if we can solve it, is incredibly large. Travel is 9% of the global GDP. It's like 1 in 8 jobs. The impact is, larger than I think most people realize. And there's a McKinsey study that says brands can get an uplift of at least 15% if they personalize. In lots of cases, it's much more than that. That's 130 billion in the travel industry. And so the potential to move the needle there, we won this Global Startup of the Year award from Focusrite, which is the main media platform in the, in the industry. And people have said to us, like, we've been talking about personalization for 25 years and we haven't figured it out. And maybe you guys have solved it. So on health, I think it's really interesting because I do think there is this concept of people owning their health identity and being in control of who they share it with for a better experience. And so I think there actually are some similarities. Now, clearly the sensitivity level of that data is, potentially on another level than your travel data. And so there's a lot of regulatory things that come with that. But think about, there's companies like Forward that are trying to change people owning essentially their health profiles, and make that portable in a way that you can share with different providers. And so like that's essentially your travel DNA should be something that you own, you can control, like updating it, you can control who you share it with, and it's going to make your life easier and better as a traveler.
That's right. So let's dive into this travel DNA. Like, what does this look like? I love the name, and I understand a lot of it's based off of or developed off of images, photographs that I'm able to share. What are the components that make up my travel DNA?
So firstly, what we have implemented today is just the metadata behind your photos. And there is so much that we can analyze and create from that. That's actually where we've started and kind of paused for now. We have a whole roadmap that includes computer vision, which is looking at the content of the photo, right? So if you're on a beach, etc. One of the things we're debating about that is there's another privacy level associated with the visual of the photo. And we have found that the messaging of we scan the data behind your photos, that resonates well. And so we think about that as a first level of interaction. And then over time, as you build trust, you could opt into additional. And so we have this whole roadmap of additional data sources. So imagine syncing your calendar, imagine syncing your email. And so every single booking or like email confirmation that you have can be scanned and included in your DNA. Bank sources, many others as well. But the photo metadata is where we've started. So essentially what we then transform that into is, on the one hand, there's a consumer travel DNA profile. And the way we think about that is like, what's interesting for us to know as travelers? Like the percentage of the world we've traveled, like we have this idea of archetypes of travelers. Like, are you a sunrise beach explorer, or are you a city nomad adventurer, etc.? And there's this like, those of us that love travel, we love to, like, there's an emotional connection with our information about our travels. Like old school, remember when you used to put pins on a map? I'm dating myself right now, but
I remember spinning the globe in a classroom and being like, where my finger lands, that's where I live.
Totally, which is what I did with the Mexico example. I know you're there now. Basically, Legends automates that whole process for you, and then instantly gives you this data of like, oh, this is who I am as a traveler, like that. And we saw this emotional reaction of people saying like, oh, I've been to more cities than you, or I'm more this than you. And so we think about elements like that from a consumer perspective. Like, what climates do you like to experience? What cuisines? And various other, like, are you an adventurer, or what are your interests? And then separately to that, but related, is the travel DNA insights, segments, and predictive analytics that we deliver to the brand. Because the whole point is to deliver to them information that's actually actionable. And so, we say sometimes that we basically have a 5-pillar approach to the data modeling, where we are delivering the why as well as the what. So if you think about the time and date that someone went, there's kind of a temporal element to it. If you think about the location of where someone went, there's like a geographical element to it. Then the motivation, what was their purpose? Was it personal? Was it business? Was it cultural? Was there an event? And then there's the persona, which we include like activities, like what are your passions, your interests, what are your spending patterns, loyalty, and things like that. And then there's the actual place. So the hotel types, the restaurant type, etc. And we believe that only when you combine all of that, you've got the why and the what, is when you can actually have a true insight as to someone's preferences. And with that information, a brand can serve up to America exactly the offer that she wants is exactly the right time, or they can provide exactly the right in-person experience that that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And then the more data that gets input, the more you learn and the better you are at discovering who this individual is.
Totally.
And we have a question coming in from our live audience. America, you want to read that?
Yeah, sure. This is from Antonio Sune. Thanks for the show, Stephanie. When are you expanding from planet Earth to Mars? Can you please talk more about the creation of Legends? What milestones are important for tech entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I love that. Well, so space travel is like a whole nother conversation that I'm super interested in. And so that's beyond. But in terms of exploration, like how fascinating that so I have a daughter, and I'm pretty sure she's 2.5 right now. I'm pretty sure by the time she's 18, it will be routine to have a space trip. So we'll park that. milestones from an entrepreneurial perspective, like one is the decision to pull the trigger and just like get it done. Because I think for a lot of us, there's ideas that brew and you think about what if, could I, and there's like fear of failure and all that stuff. So like first milestone is like going all in and deciding to kind of pull that trigger. Then there's the team, like who are the right people for you to build it with. I'm very fortunate. I had an amazing friend, and then we shared this kind of passion and complementary skill set. I do think building with a co-founder there's a lot of pros to that. And then we've been fortunate to find an amazing CTO, and so team is probably the next milestone. And then there's like problem market fit, right? Firstly, founder market fit. Are you the right person to build this? Why do you care? Like, are you actually passionate about it? Otherwise, don't bother, because it's really hard. And then there's problem market fit. Like, does the problem that you see that people have, do they actually care about solving it? And we talked about that in the travel context. And like, is it urgent? Are there resources to deliver to solving it? And then there's product market fit. Is the product that you're developing the right solution for that? And there's a saying that I've heard in entrepreneurial communities that, how do you know when you've got PMF, product market fit? It's when instead of you feel like you're pushing the rock up the hill, it's when suddenly you're like chasing it down the hill. And so like Shana and I talk about it, like we're at that kind of inflection point right now, right, with our first customers and evolution of the product. And so that's exciting.
And the opportunities, I think, that are out there. So, for example, with TravelDNA, you say that everything starts with a picture. I guess that with social media, this is like easier, right? With different channels that are out there. What can you share about that? Because social media is transforming every day, and there are more platforms that young adults are utilizing differently, like TikTok, Instagram. So, how do you adapt to that?
Yeah. Well, so it's funny when you think about Legends history, like we actually started as this social travel platform with the view that then was this gap for a travel Pacific social platform. And I still believe that in some instances, and there are various efforts around that. But then we realized the power of our technology to power B2B, and we decided the scale potential of that, and we could have more impact by going that way. But ultimately, because consumers will own their DNA in a centralized wallet, that expansion can happen for us over time. To be very clear, we decided that we're all about the Legends relationship with the consumer, or the brand direct relationship with the consumer. So it's the consumer opting in to share information. So right now, the main data source that we're using is the photos that are on your phone. So we do not sync with your social accounts. Now, there is a differing views on like how much people want to share and how and why. And I agree, like that whole landscape is shifting for many reasons. Like people are leaving those platforms, but wanting to be, create the Legends DNA is what we saw in some of our testing. But we don't want to be reliant on the APIs or those platforms. So the way we built was this direct relationship. And there's lots more we can talk about as to why those platforms will not be the people to come up with this solution.
In terms of the B2B approach, then, I mean, your consumer, your client is the brands, the Marriott's, is it just hospitality, or it works for airlines and other travel as well?
Yeah. So again, the technology in theory works for every single brand consumer interaction. We decided to focus on travel and hospitality because we had this personal mission, and then we realized the impact we could have, like we talked about. Then within travel and hospitality, we said, okay, every brand that has value from knowing their consumer, which is everyone, could have value for this. But where do we start? Where do we focus? We did a lot of discovery, and we decided to focus on initially travel advisor networks. Because it shouldn't take 10 calls for an agent to get to know their customer before they can suggest the right itinerary. We can talk about that. And then secondly, lifestyle hotels, particularly those with loyalty programs. And then third is tech providers to the ecosystem. So plugging into, if it's a property management system, for example, and that's a great kind of scale play for us. Then there's many others that we can expand to over time. Tour operators, yes, airlines, cruises, DMOs, bank programs that have a travel angle, and then there's many others. So we're an eye on expansion, but also Yeah.
So to a certain degree, there is a level of loyalty that's already required from the consumer side or the client side, my side. Then it's a matter of maybe helping more to retain your existing customers rather than to obtain new ones,
So
or
that's
is it both?
yeah, interesting. So yes, in the B2B SaaS implementation of the API, for example, yes, Kimberly has already decided to have a relationship with that brand. You may or may not be very engaged, but you've already decided to have a relationship, and that's why we believe your likelihood of consenting to create your travel DNA and share it is very high, because you're being promised a better experience with a brand you've already decided to engage with at that moment. And so, yes, that can drive better engagement, better retention, which is very relevant. For example, hotels, right? Imagine hotels being able to convert your 80% OTA booking that they currently have, moving that to direct channels, right? Huge focus for the industry. This can help do that. And then, but now with all that data, the marketing team and the data team and the loyalty team now has better segmented information about target clients. And so that can power their user acquisition as well. And so, there's lots more that we can talk about on that front, but essentially the answer is both. And then when we have, the centralized Legends platform, there's obviously an acquisition element that comes there as well.
That makes sense. So you garner insight in who is utilizing us and how can we better nurture that existing market sector. And then also the question of who's ignoring us, and do we want to pay attention to them? And if so, how? Or do we not? Is it not important?
Or like, which micro segments, we call it micro segmentation, should we kind of focus on right now? And also there's this temporal element of like the people you should market to in June is very different from the people you should market with in January, for example. And most of the information that that brands have is not necessarily dynamic or like real-time updated in that way.
I'm curious about the data that you're utilizing off of these photos. How do you go filter through this? I mean, I can look at my photos on my phone right now, and I'm like, some of them even I can feel represent me, well, they're photos that I've taken or whatever. But then there's also invitations to events that my, let's say, mother-in-law forwarded me that I honestly, not really my jam, or, a funny gift from a coworker or whatever. How do you determine what's good and what's not?
Totally. We have a whole process of screening, tiering, sorting that we've evolved like in the couple of years, because we launched with the kind of consumer facing app. We have had a lot of ability to iterate and kind of hone in on that. And so yes, we're not really looking at your screenshots, for example. And if you take 50 photos of something, you probably like it more than if you took 2 photos. And like, it gets a lot more granular than that, but I think you kind of get the idea. As well, I'll mention that at the point of consent, you can opt into sharing all your photos, which clearly gives the best DNA experience. You could also choose to just select some. Now, so you might just select like some a certain trip, or like groups that you might already have. So that is an option. But the better experience is when you provide all.
I have an example that I'm thinking. So for example, there is a picture of me where I'm in this place that is crowded. It's full of people, but I want to edit with AI or with any tool that it's out there and tick off all that people. How does it get confused with this new technology? How do you know what's real, what's not?
Real, what's not?
Exactly.
But you're not there yet, right? Because we're not doing the imagery portion, but it is a problem you'll have to solve for.
So not within Legends, but like, so in America's example, I think the question is, let's say you had taken a photo of a place, it's sitting in your camera roll, then you had updated it with AI, and then Legends takes that data and puts it as part of your DNA. And how do we know if that's real or not? Was kind of your question, right? And is that a real representation of you? I would say right now with our current approach, right, what you do with AI visually, like that doesn't change the metadata or our current process. Over time, that's definitely something to consider, and there'll be signals that we could create that would indicate whether something has been adjusted, edited, etc.
I love it. We're at our final kind of minute of today's show. If you can believe it or not, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
We always like to bring it back to the individual, the guest, your words of wisdom, your lessons learned. I know you touched on a lot of that with Antonio's great question in terms of, startups and what this looks like for an entrepreneur. But what else might you kind of give in terms of tips? What's gone right? Maybe what you might do differently.
Yeah.
I also, you mentioned a lot of things of what you've got in the pipeline, the vision of where Legends is going. Maybe lean into that, or what's
Well, I don't know about wisdom. I'm definitely learning. And that's, part of what we believe life should be, is this ongoing evolution and growth. And that's part of the fun of doing a startup, that it is always learning. I think maybe two, I guess, lessons that I've had is, authenticity will lead to the best result for you as a human and for your company. And so that was something that excited me about being an entrepreneur, is the true freedom to be yourself. There's definitely like comfort levels that can come with that, and kind of putting yourself out there. But I think, I've seen that leads to better energy, better connections, and better results. And like, what are we doing if we're not trying to enjoy this as well, right? And then secondly, I don't use the word networking per se, but I think connecting with other people, I have found incredibly valuable. So one is from an industry perspective. I think we've been incredibly fortunate to be connected, build an advisory board, and meet people through events and platforms that have helped kind of propel our journey, and be like thought leaders for us, and helped kind of guide us. And secondly, kind of the second big category is other entrepreneurs. I think I kind of underestimated the value of that, at the beginning, but I have found incredible value from joining groups like Startup Leadership Program that I did here in New York. We did Techstars at the end of last year, and a lot of that is about the community and the network. So I think that kind of putting in and also then the third category, like investors, like building the connections and understanding of who is going to be a right fit for you at different points in the journey. Like, it's a whole ecosystem. And so the earlier you start planting the seeds in each of those areas, the easier and more enjoyable your journey could probably be.
Thank you. Very wise, whether you like it or not. It was agree or not. Very wise. Thank you so much. Stephanie, it was a pleasure to get to know you today, to learn more about Legends. We certainly wish you and your company nothing but success in this 2024. I think it's going to be a big year.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you. I'll stick around for just a minute as we go off air. But before we do, we'd like to remind our audience of what we got coming up next week,
which is that we are going to have a conversation with Andre Savanjusic. Is that how you pronounce it, Kim?
I wish I could tell you, but I'm not sure either.
This is with the company Lumos, and this show is going to happen on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then we're going to have our second episode of our series of Do More in 24 with the company Provision. So don't miss those conversations at 10 a.m. Pacific.
Guests there will be David Chesler as well as Sally Kelly, and we're going to be continuing the conversation of design-led thinking, kind of that first step of implementing AI with your hospitality company this year. Perfect. See you next week, Wednesday, 10 a.m. You can also catch us on Monday at 10 a.m. for our recap show. Thank you, everyone, and